Hey, and welcome everyone to our advanced class in learning how to use the Flex framework. In today's class, we will talk about table relationships, setting up referential integrity between tables, joining tables using views, and how to use triggers, tasks, and extensions to automate procedures in the back end. Let's have a look. Once we are inside our Caspio account, go ahead and navigate over to the Tables tab, where you can see the list of all of your tables. Now, in my specific use case, we have a total of 4 tables. Applications can range from one table, if it's a very simple app, to an enterprise level application where you end up with 20, 30, even 40 tables. It really just depends on the scale of the application. And why are relationships important? Well, it's important to normalize your data, meaning that if you have one of many, so for example, in our use case, we have one contact that can have many logs. You may be wondering, why can't we just combine that in a single table? Well, that's going to create duplicates, because let's say one contact has 10 logs. Well, then you have to repeat all the contact information in that same table, such as the name, the email, the phone, while you store the log at the same time. So again, that's redundant and it creates duplicates. However, if you separate it into 2 different tables the way we have, all you're doing is repeating the ID of the contact inside the logs table. And it's very clear with that you can now understand that that one contact has many logs because that ID belongs to that specific contact. Now, what are the benefits of creating relationships? Well, let's go inside the relationship screen, and I will show you a couple of settings that you can enable as you connect your tables using primary keys and foreign keys. So we have our employee table. You can expand and collapse it. You can move it around however you want. If you have any kind of database knowledge, if you've used Microsoft Access in the past, you're going to feel right at home looking at this screen. For those of you who don't, it's really easy to understand. This is basically our table that lists all of the fields that we created. And again, as you're adding more tables to the screen, it's helpful to resize the table window so that you can move it around and decide how you want to view the structure of your database. You can work left to right, that is my preference, or some people like to look at their data top to bottom. So looking at our employees table, we know that an admin user can add a contact, and also the sales rep can add a contact. So what we're doing is we're stamping the user's ID inside a contacts table. So I will move that table inside the window. Again, you can expand this table, collapse it if you'd like. We are stamping the employee ID inside the user ID for the contacts table. So this is our foreign key and this is our primary key. So if you just drag this line over to the other field and you let go, you're going to see this pop up where we can now look at relationship settings. So what you're looking at here is the parent table, which is the employees table. We have the related table, which is the contacts table. They're joined by this user ID field. And then we have a couple of options here that Caspio provides. What you could do is you can display the full name, and you can also display the value on the data page or data part. Meaning, if you build a report based on this table, instead of seeing the user ID displayed in your report, what you're actually going to see is the full name from the parent table because you checked this box. Caspio automatically identified that relationship type as a one-to-many. You can also edit that. And then over here on the right-hand side, we have some referential integrity that we can enforce. So what does that mean? So let's say you decide to check this box to enforce referential integrity. What that means now that if you try to delete an employee from this table and that employee has linked contacts, the system is not going to let you delete that employee because you're enforcing referential integrity between these 2 tables. If you check the second box, the cascade delete related records, now if you delete the employee, any contact that's linked to that employee will automatically be deleted. So be very careful with that checkbox. And the final checkbox that we have here is cascade update, which works like cascade delete. So if I were to update, let's say Mary's information, and you're stamping Mary's information into a related table, once you make that update in the parent table, that change will cascade throughout the entire related table as well. Okay, I am not going to check these boxes in today's use case, nor do I need to enable this checkbox, but let's go ahead and do it anyway. So once you click create, now you're going to see that line between your two tables, which basically means that one employee, you can see number one, is linked to many contacts. Now, we also know that a single contact can have many logs, so we can include that table as well. And now you can see how we can move around these tables just so that we can make space for other tables. Like I said, we know that one contact can have many logs, so you can just drag this line over to the contact ID, which is the foreign key, and once again, you're going to be able to see a one-to-many. I'm going to click on create. We are also stamping the user ID inside the logs table. So rather than seeing this line go over that table, we can just rearrange this. I can also collapse this a little bit so I can see all of my tables like that. And just move this line over to the user ID field, let go, and once again, that's going to be a one-to-many, which means that every single employee in our contact management system can leave a log for that specific contact. So this relationship here, this database setup is a very simple one compared to what you might see in a more complex application where we have 10, 15, 20 tables. And if this is not familiar to you, if you've never done relationships before in a database, this is how every database-driven website functions. They all have a database behind the scenes, and that database is comprised of one or many tables, again, depending on the complexity and the size of the application. So that's a little bit about tables inside Caspio and how to create these relationships. If you're wondering, is that all I have to do in order to stamp the ID in the related table? No, you still have to configure that part on the data part level inside the designer tab. So even if you connect these lines, that doesn't mean that your application is automatically going to stamp this ID inside the logs table. We talked about that in the intermediate session where we configured it by using the insert parameter. And at one point, we were able to use the authenticated user ID field. And other times, we were able to link it to a data part and take the contact ID and stamp that into a logs table. So again, you still have to use data parts in order to stamp the ID inside related tables. This screen allows you to see a few settings that control referential integrity and also be able to display the value on the data parts. If you're happy with your layout, you can simply save the layout. And now let's move on to views. And in views, there are two ways to use the view. One way is to filter data that you want to see from your tables. And another way to use the view is to join tables together if you wish to see fields from multiple tables on your reports. What do I mean by that? Well, let's set up our first view here. And let's call this CMS, contacts, and logs. If you were to build your view just based on the contacts table, and you link that view to your data part report, well, it's just going to display the contact information. However, if I move the logs table as well to the right, on the following screen, you will see how Caspio created a join for me, which is the inner join between the contacts table and the logs table. And it's linking these two tables based on the contact ID field. Now, the only reason why Caspio connected this for me automatically is because I first went to my tables, and in the relationships, I linked my contacts table to my logs table. You don't have to do that in some cases. And if you don't do that first, and you go to views and you try to set this up, it's going to look like this. So we're just going to go ahead and make both of these two blank. And now you have to manually connect your contacts table to your logs table, but it's actually very simple to do. All you need to do is just simply find a contact ID from the contacts table, which is the primary key, and then look for the logs table contact ID. And now you have a choice. If you only want to include matching records from both tables, leave the top radio button selected. If you include all records from the contacts table and only the joining records from the matching table, which is the logs table, this is going to give you what's called a left outer join. If you go the opposite, this is going to give you a right outer join. In my case, not that we're going to use this view in the data part, I just wanted to show you how to build the view. I will select the top two radio buttons, click on the plus icon or plus sign, and then you're going to be able to see how Caspio joins that for us. You have the ability down here to edit information from one or the other table if you select one of these two tables. And then on the following screen, you will now see how Caspio joined all the fields from both tables. I will click finish to show you my view. And now when we open it, I believe there's going to be one entry because we only made one test submission in our intermediate class. And we can see the contacts information along with the log information on the right. And now what you could do is you can actually use the view as the data source when you build your data part, as opposed to a table. So again, it's very beneficial if for some reason you need to be able to see information from multiple tables. And you don't have to just join two tables. You can join multiple tables together if you wish to display information from multiple tables. I want to show you one last thing when it comes to view. If we click on edit and we hit next one more time, you're going to see this criteria tab, and we have a simple drag and drop system here where you can now decide if you wish to filter data. You can choose the field name, maybe first name, equal or not equal. You can look at the value or the field and then input your text or whatever other information you want to pull for that first name. You can set multiple elements in here. So you can do an and, you can include another or, you can add another one, and just keep adding them until you're happy with the way you want to filter data from that view. Just to give you an example of why this is helpful, I'm not going to use the table that I currently have, but sometimes we have tables that have, let's say, 50,000 rows inside them. And if you build a report, you don't want to filter through all 50,000 entries just to find what you need. You can use the view to filter. Let's say you want to just see data from the state of New York. You can use the view to filter based on that state name. So imagine this field is state, and then you select New York, and now the view is going to filter, let's say, 5,000 entries from that table. And now you can build a report that filters data through 5,000 rows as opposed to 50,000 rows. So this is why the views are helpful. Not only can we join tables together, but we can also filter data that we wish to see. Next, let's go back to the tables. And let's talk about triggered actions. Triggered actions allow us to automate procedures in the back end to avoid having to use a lot of human intervention. And I'm going to give you a very common, typical example of how you can use a trigger, which is often found in a CRM application where we can keep track of historical logs. And let's just say we're looking at our contacts table. I'm going to click more, click on triggered actions, create the trigger. And then you're going to be able to see these elements on the left-hand side. And what you can do here is you can run the action on insert of data, update, or delete, for example. So what that means is if you insert, update, or delete something inside a contacts table, I could have a different action happen in an entirely different table. But before we do that, what we want to do now is go back to our tables. I'm going to make a copy of my contacts table. Very quickly, we're going to click on duplicate. And what I want is just a table design for now. And we're going to call this history logs. I do have to make a few modifications to my second table. What we're going to do is set the contact ID to a text field. And we don't want that to be unique because now the logs table becomes a one-to-many table to my contacts table. It's a related table because we need to be able to track multiple changes for a single contact. So we want to be able to stamp the contact's ID inside a history log table. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's say you're looking at a single contact whose name is Mary Smith, and we have Mary's phone number, email. But if you're making multiple changes over time to her information, we want to be able to store all of those changes inside the history log table. Therefore, the contact ID needs to be a text 255, and it now becomes a foreign key to the parent table, which has the unique ID. But for best practice, every table must have a primary key. So let's just call this log change ID. We're going to set this to maybe random ID, and let's move it all the way up. Remember that every table must have a primary key. It's best practice, and I recommend that you always add the primary key at the very top. We have our user ID field. We have date created, and let's have one more, maybe date updated. And what we will do is make this a timestamp and simply just say stamp on update. And when you're done, click on save. Okay, proceed. Let's go back to the tables, and now let's create the trigger on the contacts table. Create triggered action. And let me show you how to set this up. It's actually very simple. So when I insert a new contact into my contacts table, and also when I update the contact's information, click on the action. I also want to insert into the history log table that we just created. Next, click on the gear icon, click on select, and we want to select from the inserted table. Do we need a where clause? We don't need a where clause in this case. That's an if statement. So if something happens to our contacts table, only then move the data into the history log table. So let me give you an example of how you can use a where clause. So if inventory falls below 50% or under 10, then add more items to the inventory. So that would be an ideal where you can use where clause. You can also pull information from other tables if you need to include that as well. So you can here in the triggered actions, you can join to a different table. But since we don't have a need for where anything conditional, we're just going to remove that and just simply drag this over the trash can. It's right underneath this chat icon. And now just add the fields that you wish to copy to the other table. So this will take me a little bit of time to include all the fields. I'm not going to do all of them, but here what you want to do next is use data, insert the field, and link that to the user ID so that we know which user made the change. That's also very important. And then for contact ID, move over the field element and then just link that to the contact ID. There's a bit of a trick here that you can enable. Instead of clicking data and moving this element every single time, you can click duplicate and just snap that in place. First name, duplicate, last name. It'll take you about a minute to get this set up. As I said, I don't want to do all of these. I just want to show you an example, maybe how we update the title as well. Let's do that one. And for company description, you're probably not going to need that. That's going to be AI generated. We'll learn that later on in the video today. And then for company name, maybe we also want to make a copy of that as well if we update the company name. Okay, so let's save it now. And let's just go ahead and see the changes that we made. So I'm going to save my trigger. Let's call this copy contact info to history log table. Save and enable. And let's test it out. If I go back to my tables and let's say we go into the contacts table and say, for example, we make an update to Rhiannon's last name. For example, we change that to Lee. Let's also change the title to maybe CEO. Maybe she's been promoted. And once you save that change, let's go into our history log table. We are going to be able to see that update. Now, you're probably wondering, well, where is the previous information? We don't have that here because we didn't set up the trigger ahead of time, right? So we already had the contact information in our table. So we don't have the original entry of that contact. However, if you set this up correctly from the beginning, and let's say you add a new contact, say, for example, we have Scott Jones, director, and company can be Acme Soft. And then we'll save that change. Let's go back into the history log table. Because I made an insert to the other table, now we have Scott's information in the history log table as well. And what you could do is you could actually build a data part that displays this information on your application so that anyone can see all the historical changes. So that's one example of how you can use a trigger. There are so many ways to use the triggers to help automate a lot of procedures in the back end, but I will leave you with this one, okay? Next, let's go ahead and move on to tasks. which can be used to send notifications based on the date field. So let's say you have a list of events and you want to send an email to all the attendees, maybe a day before the event or a week before the event as a reminder. You can use tasks to accomplish that. I don't know that I have the best use case to show you how to use the tasks. Maybe if my CRM or my contact management application had tasks in it, where we can set up a task for each contact and set a due date, well, then maybe I can email the employee or the sales rep a notification or an SMS to let them know, hey, you have a meeting with this client in a week or the next day. But I will just show you the interface. So if we create a new task, you can run the task on demand. What you really want to do is configure the task to maybe have it run weekly, daily, hourly, or once. In most applications that I've built, maybe I'm sending a monthly sales report that captures the data from the table and emails the VP or SVP or CEO. I might run that task monthly. But if you are doing event-based type configurations in your app, then I recommend doing a daily task. That's the frequency. We want to run this task every day. We're going to click apply, and then you can set up your action. So for example, send an email. And then maybe you also want to send an SMS. Click on the gear icon, select, and then you choose the table where you want to select the data from. And then you can do something like where, and then if you have a date field in your table, you could use difference in, for example. And difference can be maybe in days, equal to one day. So if you had a date field, for example, let's say this is the date of the event, you might actually use that field here as well. And let's say you're looking to grab a date field from another table. Well, then you can use the join to join maybe the logs table. And the logs table might have another date field. So what you do is you go to data, you include the field, and you're going to grab the date field from the logs table. So what it's looking at here now, imagine this is the event-based application, right? You have your events table and maybe some other table. And then what you're looking at is maybe the difference in days between the actual event date or some other date. Or what you could do is you can include a timestamp here as well. Let me move this into the trash. And I will scroll to the right a little bit so you can see number one. So what you're looking at is from today's date and the event date. If that equals to 1, go ahead and send this email. And you can also send the SMS, given that you have a phone number inside your database table, so that you can include the phone number as a field. And now the nice thing that you can do here is you can actually, if you have an email field, you can include the 2 and then choose the email, and it's going to send an email to that specific contact or a sales rep, depending on how you're configuring the task. So tasks are especially useful for sending notifications, maybe even changing the status. I'll give you one more example here. Let's say you have a list of classes where students are signing up and you have an expiration date on the class. Well, if the class expires, we can automatically update the status of that class in the table. And if you have the data part filtering set up correctly, you no longer display that class because it's expired based on that status. So that's a little bit about tasks, very powerful along with triggered actions and automating a lot of procedures in the back end. And the final thing that I want to talk about in the advanced session is the use of AI. So we are going to navigate over to integrations. I'm not going to save my task. And let's go over here to the extensions tab. Now, I've already installed my AI-powered GPT Connect. If you haven't done so, it's very easy. Just click on the add button here, and you're going to be able to install that very quickly. Once you're done, you can go ahead and click on open. We also have another extension available here, which is Slack. So if you do have a Slack account, you can send information to your chats to notify sales reps or any other team if something happens in your Caspio application. So let's open up AI-powered GPT Connect. And what we want to do is we want to set up an agent. So we create that, give it a name. What I would like to do is generate company description. Choose a profile. You can use the default profile that Caspio provides. If you click on Create Profile, you have two different AI models that you can link to, GPT-4o Mini and GPT-4o. If you click on the little eye icon here for information, you can read and understand the difference between the two. I will go back here and select the default profile. For the data source, you can see it right over here in the middle. We're going to use the CMS contacts table. Now you can also see why it's helpful to give a prefix to your table names because it's very easy to find. I want the event to happen when the data is inserted. So when the user submits the public-facing lead form and enters the company name, that means that's the event. The data is being inserted into my contacts table. Next thing that we want to do is simply provide a prompt so that we can send that to OpenAI. And then we're going to get a response back that we're going to store down below. And I will show you that in just a moment. So for the prompt, what we can do is, and sometimes you want to be very specific in terms of what you want to get back. So for instance, you can say something like, generate company description for the following field. And then what you can do is simply insert the field and we have our company name. Okay, and then you can also get even more specific if you like. You can say add just the description, no additional text of any kind, because sometimes you might get weird symbols to come back inside your data cell, so we want to avoid that. You can also ask GPT Connect to translate that to a different language if you want. You can also say something like this, limit to 500 characters, include important information for my sales team to know about. So again, depending on the request that you send, just be as specific as you want with your prompt, and that's what's going to come back into your field for company description. Now scroll down a little bit in step 3, incoming data and items. So the target field is going to be the company description. So let's hit create and let's test this out. Keep in mind that when you do submit the form, the data doesn't come back instantly. It's not in real time. And depending on how many requests you make, it might take a few seconds for the data to finally come back in. Let's try it out. Let's see what happens. We're going to go into our applications. Let's go to Flex, open up the application. Let's go to deployment. Let's go into our lead form. So the whole idea here is not to submit this form. So we will say Oscar Mendoza, let's say title CEO, company. So the company name, let's actually include a common company name, maybe Facebook, so that we can get some data back. I don't know what information we're going to come back, but we're going to try it out. Email Oscar m@fb.com, address. You can see these fields are all required, so we have to fill that in. Some street name, and let's hit submit. All right, so let's see if we already received that information. We're going to go into our table for contacts. All right, so now let's go ahead and scroll down. And we can see that information automatically populating. Let's see if we can expand this just so that we can see what we received. As far as the data, a little bit hard to see. I'd have to. All right, let's take a look. So we have some information about Facebook. We can see 2.9 billion active monthly active users, launched in 2004. Definitely less than 500 characters here. And also there is some useful information for the sales team to know about, a little bit about Facebook. So that's how you can use GPT Connect and AI to generate data back to your Caspio tables. And as you saw, that was very fast. So that concludes all of the topics for the advanced session. I really hope that you enjoyed the class and all 3 sessions, starting with basic, intermediate, and advanced. Hopefully you learn how to use the Flex. It's really just the tip of the iceberg. It's now up to you to go in, do a deep dive, and figure out how you can customize things and create your own applications. And if you have any questions, you can always contact Caspio and visit our knowledge base at howto.caspio.com for more information. Thanks for watching, and good luck building your applications.